government, and you're an embarrassment now to Australia and the rest of the world.
Senator Lyons, it being 2 p.m, we will move to questions without notice. Senator O'Neill.
Thank you very much, Mr President, and congratulations. My question is to the Minister representing the Deputy Prime Minister, Senator Mackenzie. Liberal Senator Holly Hughes said yesterday, and I quote, "The Liberal Party represents 24 rural and regional seats in the House of Representatives, which makes it the largest party representing rural and regional Australians. How can the minister claim, as she did yesterday, that the National Party is the only one standing up for the regions?"
The Minister representing the Deputy Prime Minister, Senator Mackenzie.
Thank you very much, and I do thank the senator for her question and her casual interest in regional Australia. She pops in and pops out, and President, in your former role as chair of the Murray-Darling Basin Select Committee, you did see Senator O'Neill pop into basin communities, make some swift promises, scatter some caring words to false hope to irrigators. Thank you, Senator Davey. And waltz out of town without actually telling those irrigators that the Labor Party—
Minister, please resume your seat. Senator O'Neill, on a point
I know
of
that Senator
order.
Mackenzie has difficulty
Senator O'Neill, on a point of order.
The point of order is relevance. This is a question of significant import to the people of Australia, who deserve an answer to the question that was asked,
O'Neill,
not a rant from Senator Mackenzie.
What is the point? Senator O'Neill, there is no point of order. Senator Mackenzie, you have the call.
Thank you. Look, and I look forward to spending this question time talking about the needs and interests of rural and regional Australia for as many times as the Labor Party chooses to ask us a question. It's actually nice to have the Labor Party asking the government questions about rural and regional Australia.
Minister, please resume your seat. Senator Gallagher.
Point of order, Mr President. Direct relevance to the question. Question time shouldn't be an opportunity for ministers to just rant about the opposition. They should be directly relevant to the question they've asked, which is about the regions, and it's about the regions and regional Liberal representation of those regions, not the Labor Party.
Yeah, Senator Gallagher, you've had a chance to bring the minister's attention back to the question. Minister, I accept that it's a general question in nature, in that it involves regional Australia. However, I will ask you to direct your attention to the question. Minister.
Well, thank you, Mr President. The National Party and the Country Party before it has one goal, one constituency. Other political parties in this House, in this chamber, represent a raft of constituencies. But I can tell this chamber very, very proudly, we don't seek to represent the needs and interests of Woolloomooloo, and it's great that my Senate colleague Holly Hughes from Sydney is very, very keen to talk about the needs and interests
of— Minister, could you please resume your seat? Those on my left, interjections are always disorderly. I cannot hear the minister. Minister, you have the call.
Thank you. And so we only have one mandate, and it is to stand up for the needs of rural and regional Australia. We've been doing it for a century. We're very proud to do that because it allows us not to be distracted by other interests, by other constituencies. And the big parties, fairly, have a range of constituencies that they have to manage, as the Labor Party. And unfortunately, not enough of the Labor Party MPs and senators give a damn about regional Australia. You see it in your policies. You see it in your public—
The time for the answer has expired. Senator O'Neill, a supplementary question. Order. Order. Senator O'Neill, resume your seat, please. This is generally considered a time for the opposition. I would prefer not to waste that time. Senator O'Neill, you have the call.
Very much, Mr President. Now, Senator Hughes also said, and I quote, "It is a misnomer to assume It's only the National Party that represents the voice of rural and regional Australians. Is Senator Hughes wrong?
Minister.
Well, I'll reiterate it again, Senator O'Neill. The Labor Party has members from rural and regional Australia. The Liberal Party has great members that represent rural and regional Australia. Several of them made comments this week, and I refer to Tony Passon's public commentary, Rick Wilson's public commentary, Rowan Ramsey's public commentary, great Melissa Price from Durack in WA, really strong representatives from rural and regional Australia. But when you ask what my job is as the leader of the National Party in this place and what every single National Party senator cares about, we only have one focus, we only have one constituency. We're not distracted by anything else other than the needs and interests of rural and regional Australia. And we're very, very comfortable to fulfil that role.
Senator O'Neill, a second supplementary.
Thank you, Mr President. Has the minister told her 24 regional and rural Liberal colleagues what she really thinks of them?
Senator Mackenzie.
Love to all the rural and regional MPs in the coalition, because when we come into this place, and Senator Wong's earlier contribution to the Senate, she spoke about targets and quotas. And I've been on the public record. I want to see a cabinet and a parliament full of as many rural and regional MPs and senators as possible, because rural and regional people, the most marginalised in this country, the poorest in this country, need strong representation.
Senator Mackenzie, please resume your seat. Senator Wong.
Thank you, Mr President. Direct relevance. I hardly think it can possibly be directly relevant to refer to a two-minute statement I gave about women in the context of a question in question time about regional representation.
On the point of order, Senator Canavan.
Mr President, with all respect, that is not a point of order at all. That is absolutely a debating point that the minister has every right to raise in this place in the context of the answer she is giving.
I believe the minister was discussing regional and rural representation in the parliament, and her answer was directly relevant. Minister Mackenzie, did you have anything further to add?
I've got 30 more seconds to extol the benefits of being a rural and regional MP in a very successful and strong coalition that has delivered for rural and regional Australia for a decade. And I mentioned some of my Liberal colleagues who are very proud, strong advocates for the regions, who joined with the National Party when this place was discussing climate change policy at another time, and they actually stood up against the Labor Party.
Senator Mackenzie, your time has expired. Senator Small.
Thank you, Mr President, and it does feel good to say that. My question is to the Minister representing the Minister for Health and Aged Care, Senator Colbeck. Can the minister update the Senate on how Australia's COVID-19 vaccination rollout is supporting our national plan to safely reopen the country, and further, how Australia's vaccination rates compare with other countries around the world?
The Minister representing the Minister for Health and Ageing, Senator Colbeck.
Thank you, Mr President. I thank Senator Small for his question. As a proud West Australian, I can understand him being very interested in vaccination rates, Mr President. By the end of today, Mr President, we will have administered over 33 million doses of COVID-19 vaccine to Australians. Australia's COVID-19 vaccination program has continued to accelerate, as we said it would. Mr President, in the last month, over 7.8 million doses of vaccine have gone into the arms of Australians around the country, and we thank each and every Australian for rolling up their sleeves to get the jab. Mr President, I am delighted to report that 85.1% of the population aged over 16 are now protected against COVID-19 with at least one dose, and Mr President, 69.2% of the population over the age of We've in fact passed them, Senator, if you've been keeping notice. We've actually even passed Israel, which you try to quote in the chamber. Mr President, as these numbers show, Australians recognise that vaccination is the best way to protect themselves, their loved ones and their country, Mr President. Mr President, in the context of cases this year versus last year and the impacts that we've seen, Mr President, last year there were 28,424 cases of the virus in Australia, 2,051 of those in aged care. This year there's been 118,851 cases, 681 of those in aged care, Mr President. The difference, Mr President, between this year and last year is vaccination. Mr President, the message is very clear. The vaccines work, and the message to Australians is get vaccinated.
Senator Small, a supplementary question.
Thank you, Mr President. Can the minister outline what this Liberal national government is doing to protect younger members of the Australian community?
Senator Watt. Senator Colbeck.
Thank you, Mr President, and very proudly, Senator Watt, very proudly.
Order.
Mr President, I'm very happy to report that the vaccination rollout continues strongly for 12 to 15-year-olds. In just over a month, 59.6% of 12 to 15-year-olds have been vaccinated with a first dose, and 23.7%, Mr President, have been vaccinated with their second dose, fully vaccinated. Mr President, that is an extraordinary effort, and I thank all of them, their families, for again jumping on board, rolling up their sleeves to protect themselves and their communities in this pandemic. Mr President, as for the 5 to 11-year-old age group, Australia's medical regulator, the Therapeutic Goods Administration, has provided provisional determination which allows for Pfizer to submit its application for 5 to 11-year-olds. As soon as that data is received, it will be assessed.
Senator Small, a second supplementary.
Thank you, Mr President. Minister, what other measures is this government considering, including new treatments, in order to treat presentations of COVID-19?
Minister.
Thank you, Mr President. The government continues to work to support Australians in the fight against COVID-19, including with additional treatments. In recent times, we've secured access to 2 additional treatments, Mr President. Under a new agreement with Roche Products, Australia will be supplied with 15,000 doses of the COVID-19 antibody-based therapy Ronapreve. Ronapreve is expected to be targeted for use in unvaccinated people who are at risk of developing severe disease. In addition, the Australian government has secured access to 500,000 treatment courses of Pfizer's COVID-19 oral antiviral drug, Mr President. This treatment is still undergoing clinical trials. It is expected to help reduce the severity or onset of illness and expected to be available, Mr President, next year. As the Australia has also secured an advance purchase agreement for 300,000 courses of the promising oral COVID-19
the time
treatment.
For your answer has expired. Senator Walsh.
Thank you, President. My question is to the Minister representing the Deputy Prime Minister, Senator Mackenzie. Mr Morrison said yesterday in House Question Time, and I quote, "The government's decision on the government's commitments for Australia in relation to COP26 will be made by the government in Cabinet." When was the Deputy Prime Minister first told by Mr Morrison that he intends to move ahead with net zero by 2050 with or without the support of the Nationals party room?
The Minister representing the Deputy Prime Minister, Senator Mackenzie.
Thank you, Mr President, and thank you very much for your question. Well, as has been made very clear by the Deputy Prime Minister and by the National Party MPs and senators, we are going through our own internal processes to assess any commitment by the government towards net zero 2050, and in a respectful, calm manner, we shall make those views known to the Prime Minister, and Barnaby Joyce is in those discussions as we speak. And so, I think for anyone to cause us to rush that decision to actually force our hand when the momentous nature of this decision and the far-reaching impacts of this decision on the people we were sent here to represent haven't properly been assessed, is us not doing our job. Us not doing our job. Well, it's not just us. I'll take that interjection from Senator O'Neill. It's not just us. I have some quotes here. There are a couple of Labor MPs who are from the regions. Joel Fitzgibbon, a fantastic member for Hunter, who has been on the record for very—
Senator McKenzie. Senator McKenzie, please resume your seat. Senator Watt on a point of order.
Thank you, Mr. President. I would have been on my feet a lot more quickly if it wasn't for that cord.
Don't get tangled up, Senator Watt.
On relevance, it's not about the process the government's going through. Very specific question as to when the Deputy Prime Minister was first told by Mr Morrison that he intends to move ahead with or without the support of the National Party room. That's the question, not anything else. We'd ask that we get a relevant answer.
Senator Wong, please allow me to rule. Senator McKenzie has been directly relevant to the question. However, I detect you may be straying from that, Senator McKenzie. However, the bulk of her answer up until now has clearly been directly relevant. So I will remind Senator McKenzie of the question and ask her not to stray from it, but you have the call. Senator McKenzie.
Don't stray. Thank you, Mr President. Well, as I said, the National Party has been very clear what we're doing this week. We're making sure that rural and regional jobs will be protected, that we can ensure that any move towards net zero 2050 will ensure that the impacts won't be borne by the people that have sent us to Parliament. It's actually the very essence of democracy. And if those opposite actually remembered who they supposedly represent, the blue singlet workers in this country, the foresters, the manufacturers, the miners. I tell you what, there's only two people in your political party who are actually sticking up for those workers, and it's Joel Fitzgibbon and Meryl Swanston.
Senator McKenzie, your time has expired. Senator Walsh, a supplementary question.
Mr Joyce has said, and I quote, "It is correct that a decision of Cabinet is not a decision that comes to a vote or has anybody crossing the floor." Has the Deputy Prime Minister informed his party room that the Morrison-Joyce government's position of net zero emissions by 2050 will be determined regardless of their views?
Senator McKenzie.
Well, thank you very much, Mr President. For 75 years, two political parties have come together to form a very, very strong coalition which has delivered stable, successful government more often than not. Well, you know what? You say that, but it's a long time since you've been here. It's a long time since you've been here. And it's because the Liberal Party focuses on what they do best and the National Party focuses on what we do best, which is standing up for rural and regional Australia. And that is actually what we're doing here today. And because of that 75 years, and indeed nearly the last decade, we have seen record growth in our mineral exports. We've seen record growth in our agricultural exports, job booms in both these industries, and we've seen a 20% decrease in our emissions. Without your ETS, without your carbon tax, we've been driving down emissions and growing jobs.
The time for the answer has expired. Senator Walsh, a second supplementary question.
Senator Canavan has said, and I quote, "Perhaps a decision has already been made by reports in the media. It seems like the Prime Minister is gaslighting the joint party room. Does the Deputy Prime Minister think Senator Canavan is right when he says Mr Morrison is gaslighting?"
Senator McKenzie.
Well, OK. Matt, you've had your chance. I'm answering on your behalf. Look, I think obviously every successful partnership in life has to be a respectful one. And I think we know in the coalition that it's been a strong relationship. We need to be unified. We're best when we're unified, but we don't always agree. And this actually is one of those points where we have to assess the information in front of us and come to a considered position. Like, people shouldn't be surprised about this. It is not about elbow waltzing into the Labor Party caucus and saying, OK, I've done the deal, the left says this, the New South Wales right says that, the Victorian left says this, Kim Carr says something else, and this is going to be our position on this particular policy decision. No. There are two independent parties
Senator
here,
McKenzie,
and it may be uncomfortable.
The time for the answer has expired, and I will remind all senators that we should revert to those from the other place by their correct titles. Senator Hanson-Young.
Thank you, Mr President. Congratulations on your appointment. My question is to Senator Birmingham, representing the Prime Minister. The EU ambassador has warned that Australia may face carbon tariffs if Mr Morrison doesn't stump up to Glasgow with strong 2030 targets, the target that actually matters. What guarantees can you provide that the Prime Minister won't walk into Glasgow with empty hands on the crucial 2030 target and therefore come home carrying in his luggage carbon tariffs from our major trading partners?
The Minister representing the Prime Minister, Senator Birmingham.
Thanks, Mr President. I thank Senator Hanson-Young for the question. Indeed, Mr President, I'm very happy to provide guarantees that the Prime Minister, as is indicated, will travel to Glasgow. He will outline the extent to which Australia has made commitments in the past, met and exceeded our commitments in the past across the Kyoto Protocol, first commitment period and second commitment period. He will outline how, in relation to the Paris Agreement, Australia is meeting and on track to beat our 2030 targets, indeed demonstrating that, once again as a country, we don't just talk about these things. When we make a commitment, we deliver on it, and we deliver on it in ways that actually exceed those expectations. And of course, our commitments that we've done to date have seen our emissions fall faster than Canada or Japan or New Zealand or the United States. So we can demonstrate very clearly that we have made commitments, that our commitments are delivering, and that our commitments indeed are exceeding. And our delivery is exceeding many of those around the rest of the world. But importantly, the Prime Minister won't just be going to Glasgow talking about our commitments for the future. He'll also be going talking about our plans on how we deliver those commitments, our plans on how we deliver them in terms of continuing to reduce those emissions in ways that have led and exceeded so much of the rest of the world to date, and our plans on how we will protect the jobs in Australian communities on that journey, because that is something that is all too often overlooked from those in the Greens and those opposite who want to make the commitment first and worry about the job impacts after. On this side, the Liberal Party and the National Party, working together, are seeking to address all of those issues concurrently, ensuring that we are best placed to keep reducing emissions while continuing to grow our economy, while continuing to protect and support jobs in regional communities around Australia. That's what we've done through the last few years, and that's what we'll continue to do successfully.
Birmingham, your time has expired. Senator Hanson-Young, a supplementary question.
Thank you, Mr President. While the minister was answering this question, we had the leader of the National Party yell out, "Who cares?" in relation to what the EU is saying and doing. Could the minister please explain whether the Prime Minister cares what the EU is saying and what the rest of the world requires and expects when he goes to Glasgow?
Senator Birmingham.
Well, there's many things, Mr President, that the Prime Minister cares about. He cares first and foremost about Australians, their safety, their security, their jobs, their economic prosperity. That's why the work we're doing as a government is putting all of those interests first. We're putting those interests first of Australians first by ensuring that we follow through on our emissions reductions commitments as part of our global engagement on climate change. We're putting those interests of Australians first by ensuring that we do that in ways that back technological change, that back the development of things that will drive emissions down while protecting the jobs of Australians. We're putting the interests of Australians first by ensuring that we have a strong story to tell the rest of the world in terms of our emissions reductions, but the investment opportunities in Australia, in terms of continuing to achieve those changes, be they in areas of hydrogen or other areas of technological change that will enable us to beat that into the future. And we look forward to our European friends and other global friends being partners
Senator
as they
Birmingham,
are in that journey.
Time to answer the question has expired. Senator Hanson-Young, a second supplementary.
Thank you, Mr President. If you don't have a plan to get out of coal and gas, you don't have a plan to reduce pollution and stop climate change. Last month, the Environment Minister approved 4 new coal mines. There's 72 new coal mines on the government's books and 44 new gas projects. How will the Prime Minister explain this when he gets to Glasgow?
Minister.
Thanks, Mr President. Well, Australia's domestic energy market has undergone amazing transformation, and that transformation of Australia's domestic emissions market sees us as having the world's highest uptake of rooftop solar in the world, sees us as seeing us having huge investment in terms of those renewable sectors, and underpinned, indeed, by our investment in Snowy 2.0 and the Battery of the Nation project. The types of projects Senator Hanson-Young is asking about largely fuel the energy demands of other countries, of other nations. Now, as those nations make transition, which many of them are committing to do so, we will see a transition in terms of the demand for energy. That's why we are seeking to invest and to make sure we can attract those international partners, like the agreements we've signed with Japan or Korea or Germany or Singapore in relation to cooperation on new energy opportunities for the future. That's about backing those partners who may, as part of their transition, continue to draw on some of those resources projects from Australia, but we want to make sure that if they transition, when they transition, we have the alternatives in place to work with them as well.
Expired. We now go to the remote, hopefully. Senator Griff, you have the call.
Yes, thank you, Mr President. My question is to Senator Colbeck, representing the Minister of Health, and relates to tobacco control and non-nicotine vaping products. Minister, non-nicotine e-cigarettes are not therapeutic goods and as such do not come under the purview of the TGA. They are classed as consumer goods. Now, new Australian research from Curtin University shows that flavourings and other additives in so-called nicotine-free e-cigarettes are harmful and include cancer-causing substances, pesticides, heavy metals, and even the addition of nicotine in many instances. Does government hold concern over the fact that these easily available consumer products are toxic and potentially carcinogenic, particularly given the take-up of these products by teenagers?
The Minister representing the Minister for Health, Senator Colbeck.
Thank you, Mr President. Thanks, Senator Griff, for the question. The government remains vigilant to the development and the emerging non-tobacco devices that have potential to normalise smoking behaviours amongst children, young adults, and where the risk of harm such products are not yet fully understood or known. These products, the non-nicotine products, as you've indicated, is not regulated through the health system, but is regulated by the Australian Industrial Chemicals Introduction Scheme, ACIS, or what used to be known as NICNAS, and categorises their introduction into one of 5 categories. And I can refer you to the ACIS website for the information on non-nicotine liquids for vaping devices on their website, Mr President. The regulation of domestic sale and supply of non-nicotine vaping products and devices is in fact regulated by states and territories under their respective tobacco laws and regulations. In Western Australia, for example, products that resemble tobacco products, including e-cigarette devices, whether or not they contain nicotine, cannot be sold by tobacco or general retailers, Mr President.
Senator Griff, a supplementary question.
Minister, vaping in school-aged teens is a well-recognised problem, and the research has shown that both nicotine and non-nicotine vapes can act as a gateway to tobacco use. What assistance is the federal government offering the states, or are you aware of any plans to offer the states assistance to actually tackle this?
Minister.
Thank you, Mr President. The Commonwealth Government continues to work with the states with respect to tobacco and non-tobacco control measures. Obviously, the Australian Industrial Chemical Introduction Scheme is a combination of what was formerly state and territory regulatory frameworks into a national one. and so in that context we continue to work with the states. We acknowledge the research that's recently been done by the Lung Foundation of Australia and Minderoo, which tested the ingredients and toxicity of 52 e-liquids for sale over the counter in Australia in both their origin and vaped form, which found that 100% of e-liquids had between 1 and 18 chemicals to have unknown effects on respiratory health. So we continue to work closely with the states and territories in the regulation of this matter.
Senator Griff, a second supplementary question.
Thank you, Minister, but I can gather from your answer that the Commonwealth isn't working with the states in relation to the issue with school-aged teens, but perhaps we'll discuss that separately. Does the government consider it as time to reinvigorate its anti-tobacco campaigns, which have historically helped Australians drive down smoking rates to some of the best in the world?
Minister.
Thank you, Mr. President. Can I acknowledge that the campaigns that have been run over many years have in fact achieved the results that Senator Griff has indicated. A strong and continued message, one that is appropriately targeted, particularly into those communities, young Australians and those communities where we still see unacceptably high rates of smoking, but also use of some of these new technologies is something that we need to continue to work with both states and territories and at a Commonwealth level with, to ensure that people understand the harms. The research that's recently been published that I mentioned by the Lung Foundation provides some level of alertness to that, but communicating that information and continuing the program to encourage people to give up smoking and these other technologies, one that we need to continue to work on.
Thank you, Minister. Senator Keneally.
Thank you very much. My question is to the Minister for Regionalisation, Regional Communications and Regional Education, Senator Mackenzie. The Cabinet Handbook requires members of Cabinet to observe Cabinet solidarity. Does Cabinet solidarity extend to this Minister and Nationals members of Cabinet publicly campaigning against Mr Morrison's stated intention to adopt net zero by 2050?
The Minister for Regionalisation, Senator Mackenzie.
Thank you very much, Mr President, and I thank Senator Keneally for the question. As the Prime Minister's made clear, this is a decision for Cabinet and no decision's been made. And so that is as it stands. Every Cabinet Minister in the Senate is aware of the processes of Cabinet and of the Cabinet Handbook and of our responsibilities as Cabinet Ministers in this government. And it has been an incredibly collegiate Cabinet that's been able to deliver for rural and regional Australia. My question, though, is, I guess, and having dealt with that question, I am very, very happy to go to the fact that Labor Party, and your question belies your strategy, that you're all politics and
Senator Mackenzie, please resume your seat. Senator Keneally on a point of order.
Thank you. My question is direct relevance. The Minister, by her own answer, is admitting that she is straying into areas that are not relevant to this rather tightly worded question.
President,
Minister?
Senator Keneally was asking quite a politicised question in the way in which she presented it. In terms of there being any substance to the question, Senator Mackenzie has directly addressed the substance of the question in relation to knowledge of the Cabinet rules and processes. And Senator Mackenzie, having directly addressed the question, is fully entitled to add context to the answer she has given.
Senator Mackenzie, I believe you were being directly relevant to the question. However, your choice of phrase in broadening your answer was probably not indicating that you were staying directly relevant to the question. So I will bring your attention back to the question. However, you have the call.
Thank you very much, Mr President. And having answered Senator Keneally's question, I want to go to other aspects of her question, being around the decision on the issue that we're discussing today becoming before Cabinet. The Labor Party chooses to politicise their questions to me all day yesterday, all day today. It's the quote-a-thon. We'll have George Christensen, I'm sure, at some point today, others tomorrow. The fact is that you are playing politics with this question because you actually have no plan. You actually have no plan yourselves to take forward. You have had 8 different positions on this question. 8. And, you know, whether it's Chris Bowen, whether it's Mark Butler, whether it's a fantastic member for Hunter, who sadly won't be running at the next election, provides an opportunity for this side of the chamber, quite frankly, Meryl Swanson and the like. You are much more divided on this question going forward than we ever have been. The National Party is focused
Senator
on its
McKenzie,
job.
your time for the answer has expired. Senator Keneally, a supplementary question.
Thank you, Mr. President. The Prime Minister has made clear that net zero emissions by 2050 will be a decision of Cabinet. Given the Cabinet handbook requires that, and I quote, members of Cabinet must publicly support all government decisions made in Cabinet even if they do not agree with them. Does this minister commit to supporting the Liberal plan for net zero emissions by 2050 once it is adopted by Cabinet?
Senator McKenzie.
I completely reject the many assumptions and presumptions that exist in Senator Keneally's question. As I've just said, the Cabinet has not made a decision, and the Prime Minister has been clear about that, as is the Deputy Prime Minister. And they are making sure that the National Party has a chance, as an independent, sovereign party, to make their own decision. And we will go through a process that we've outlined. As I've stated, though, you know, this tacky, tawdry political game that you're choosing to play because you don't have a plan. You're not standing up saying what you think should be taken to Glasgow, what you think the 2030 target should be, which is why the Greens chose to try and wedge you this morning. I just want to read from Paul Kelly's Triumph and Demise, the broken promise of a Labor generation.
Senator McKenzie, your time has expired. Your time has expired, Senator McKenzie. And I don't think question time, you can't have the length of answer required to read quotes from a book. Senator Keneally, you have a second supplementary.
The Cabinet handbook also states that, and I quote, Cabinet ministers cannot disassociate themselves from or repudiate the decisions of their Cabinet colleagues unless they resign from Cabinet. Given this minister's stated opposition to the Liberals' plan for net zero emissions by 2050, will this minister resign from Cabinet once it is adopted by Cabinet?
Senator McKenzie.
That is absolutely a hypothetical question there, Senator Keneally. I've been very clear on what the process that has been outlined by the Deputy Prime Minister and the Prime Minister are. So I'll return to what former Nationals leader Warren Truss had to say when the Rudd Labor government put the ETS before this situation. Your climate policy said—
Senator McKenzie, Senator McKenzie, resume your seat. Senator Watt on relevance.
How is this possibly relevant?
Watt, on a point of order?
Yeah, on relevance. How is quoting from a book about the Rudd-Gallard government possibly relevant to a question about the Cabinet handbook? Mr. President.
Order.
I haven't finished. I haven't finished.
He did sit down. Senator Watt, to be fair, you did sit down.
Mr. President, I would submit that ministers are flagrantly abusing the privileges of senators in here and are testing your limits as the new president, and I'd ask you to make sure that their answers are relevant.
Senator Watt, I have heard your point of order. I have another submission, I assume, on the point of order. Senator Birmingham.
On the point of order, Mr. President. The question was a question that went to matters of Cabinet convention and processes, which are, of course, indeed very long-standing customs and practices. I am not aware of the content of the quote that Senator McKenzie is going to use yet, and unless Senator Watt has powers that I've not yet seen, nor is he. So it's entirely possible that the quote is indeed relevant to matters of cabinet process and cabinet consideration, which would make it directly relevant to the question that was asked.
Senator Mackenzie, I believe that Senator Watt may have a point of order, but as Senator Birmingham has pointed out, without knowing the content of your question, I would caution you against reading something that is not relevant. Senator Mackenzie, you have the call.
I was asked this in my capacity as a Cabinet Minister, and so I'm quoting a former National Party Cabinet Minister and Deputy Prime Minister, who, when considering this exact issue under the Rudd Labor government in the shadow cabinet, said that the Labor Party's climate policy was a job-destroying rabid dog that should be put down.
Senator Mackenzie, unless you want to return to the question, I'm going to ask you to stop reading from the book. So
I'll sit there, but I'll agree to your ruling, Mr. President.
Senator Mackenzie, you have the call. You have 19 seconds remaining if you wish to take it. Senator Mackenzie?
Look, I'm very proud to be leader of a Senate team that doesn't shy away from having the tough conversations. Too many people in this place don't stand up for the people that sent them here. Ask the foresters, ask the CFMEU, ask Michael O'Connor, who actually stands up for their jobs, and it's not you.
Your time for the answer has expired. Senator Patterson.
Thank you and congratulations, Mr President. My question is to the Attorney-General, Senator Cash. Can the Attorney-General update the Senate how the Liberal and Nationals government is equipping our law enforcement and security agencies with the resources they need to keep Australians safe from violent extremism?
The Attorney-General, Senator Cash.
Thank you, Mr President, and I also offer you my congratulations on the election to your new role. I also acknowledge Senator Patterson's role as the head of the Parliamentary Committee on Intelligence and Security. And in answering this question, I also acknowledge the recent death of the UK Conservative MP Sir David Amess in a terrorist attack. Mr President, without a doubt, a fundamental responsibility of the coalition government is to keep Australia and Australians safe, to protect our way of life, our freedoms and our values. Our government will continue to combat and keep Australians safe from terrorism and from violent extremism, regardless of the ideology behind it. We may be in the middle, as we know, of a global pandemic, but the threat of terrorism, it remains in Australia as it does around the world. Since the national terrorism threat was raised to probable in September 2014, there have been 9 attacks and 21 major disruption operations in response to imminent attacks that were being planned on Australians. There have been 143 people now charged as a result of 70 counter-terrorism operations since 2014, and there are currently 29 people before the courts for terrorism-related offences. To respond to these threats, the government has now passed 25 tranches of national security legislation. As I said, a fundamental responsibility of the coalition government is to keep Australia and Australians safe. The legislation that we have passed is helping provide security agencies with the tools and the legal framework that is necessary to protect Australia, but also to combat new attempts and methods of violent extremism.
Senator Patterson, a supplementary question.
Thank you, Mr President. How is the increased investment from the government in our law enforcement and security agencies helping to keep Australia and Australians safe from emerging threats?
Attorney-General.
Well, Mr President, in terms of emerging threats, the digital world is now the new frontier that organised crime, terrorist and state-sponsored actors are using to threaten Australia and to threaten our way of life. The government is investing almost $1.7 billion through our cyber security strategy to position Australia to meet these evolving threats and to improve capabilities to identify and disrupt cyber security threats. In April of this year, the Foreign Minister released the International Cyber and Critical Technology Engagement Strategy to ensure we can develop global cyber resilience and tackle issues of cross-border cyber threats that are growing in both intensity and in frequency. By working, as the Foreign Minister knows, with our national partners and investing in our own capabilities, we can work to both minimise and disrupt cybersecurity threats by these organisations.
Senator Patterson, a second supplementary question.
Thank you, Mr President. How will the AUKUS trilateral agreement help our law enforcement and security agencies deepen cooperation with our security partners to protect Australians and our way of life?
Attorney General.
Well, Mr President, the AUKUS partnership between Australia, the United Kingdom and the USA builds on our nation's close ties, but it will also enable us to deepen cooperation on a range of emerging security matters. AUKUS will build on Australia's already significant network of international partnerships, including with ASEAN, our Pacific family, the Five Eyes, the Quad, and other like-minded partners within our region. This, in turn, will help our security and law enforcement agencies to develop and enhance our capabilities, initially in cybersecurity, artificial intelligence and quantum technologies. Mr President, by partnering with our allies, we can continue to protect Australians and our way of life through continuing prosperity and security in our region, and by ensuring our agencies are at the forefront of new technology. Again, our fundamental priority is keeping Australia and Australians safe.
Now we go to Senator Lambie on the remote. Senator Lambie, you have the call.
Thank you, Mr President, and congratulations. My question is to the Minister representing the Minister for Health, Senator Colbeck. When the Prime Minister shut down the country in March 2020, he promised Australians that he would use the time wisely and get ourselves ready before we had an outbreak. He told us we would make sure our hospital systems could cope with COVID before it...
Senator Lambie, I'm afraid you've just dropped out on us. Can you hear me?
Into Tasmanian hospitals to make sure they are safe for us.
Senator Lambie,
and are ready so we can reopen the state.
Senator Lambie, can you hear me? Senator Lambie, can you hear me? All right, we'll move on to the next question and come back to Senator Lambie with the agreement of the chamber. So we'll go to Senator Gallagher.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much.
Sorry, Mr President, I can hardly hear you breaking up.
Sorry, Senator Lambie. We've moved on to the next question unless we've got a better line now. No. We'll have to... Senator Lambie, if you can hear me, could you disconnect and reconnect? All right, Senator Gallagher, you have the call.
Thank you, Mr President. My question is to the Minister representing the Prime Minister and the Minister for Finance, Senator Birmingham. How much will taxpayers have to pay for Mr Morrison's deal to get the National Party to agree to net zero by 2050?
The Minister representing the Prime Minister, the Minister for Finance, Senator Birmingham.
Thanks, Mr President. Mr President, this question is almost identical to the question that Senator Gallagher asked me yesterday. And indeed, I will happily refer to the answer I gave yesterday and the fact that what this government will do is make sure that we invest, as we have done successfully since our election in 2013, to reduce emissions for the nation, which have been reducing at rates far in excess of many other nations around the world, and have reduced since 2005, as I said before, in excess of countries like Canada or Germany or the United States or New Zealand. We'll also do so through investments in a way that support transition in regional communities, and particularly confronting, as we do, the changed global environment in terms of changes in our commodities markets, changes in investment markets, as other parts of the world make their decisions in relation to net zero. We see an even heightened importance in relation to backing and supporting Australian communities who will be impacted by those change decisions happening overseas, but also who face, in some cases, opportunities created by those changing environments overseas. So we'll be investing to back those communities, make no bones about it, as we have all along. And indeed, our investments all along have achieved the types of outcomes of reducing emissions without the type of costs that those opposite in the alternative policy regime sought to place on those communities. Our approach of backing technology and incentives to drive investment towards emissions reduction is achieving outcomes without the higher taxes on electricity costs, without the higher costs that hurt jobs and growth across the Australian economy. That was the formula of the Labor Party and those opposite. We have taken a different approach, and despite the fact that we were told time and time again by those opposite that our approach wouldn't see emissions go down, emissions have gone down. Emissions have gone down. So have electricity prices. They've gone down, and jobs have gone up. And that's the trifecta that we intend to continue to invest and support.
Minister, your time has expired. I did miss the Senator Wong. I did miss the clock because there was so much interjecting happening from my left. Senator Gallagher, a supplementary question.
Thank you, Mr. President. Is the minister aware of any upper limit on the amount of taxpayer dollars Mr Morrison is willing to spend to secure an agreement with the National Party on net zero emissions by 2050? Is there an upper limit?
Minister Birmingham.
Thanks, Mr. President. Well, the first thing I'd observe is there was no limit on how much those opposite were happy to tax. There was no limit in terms of their willingness. But what we will do, as we have demonstrated on our track record, is we will target investment to drive emissions down and to protect jobs. We'll target investment to drive emissions down and to keep electricity prices lower. We'll target investment to make sure that we drive emissions down and create new investment opportunities.
Minister, please resume your seat. Senator Wong, on a point of order.
Direct relevance, Mr. President. The question was very tightly worded, and it asks whether the Finance Minister can advise of any upper limit on how much the government will pay in taxpayers' dollars to get a deal with the Nationals. It's not about emissions policy. It's not about the history of the Labor Party. It is about how much this Finance Minister is willing to spend of taxpayers' money on getting this deal.
Senator Wong, you have brought the minister's attention back to the question. Minister, you have the call.
Thanks, Mr. President. In relation to how much we invest, let me make this bold prediction, Mr. President. Let me make this bold prediction. When we outline plans to invest in regional communities across Australia, I bet those opposite will support every dollar of that investment. I bet they won't be game to go to the next election saying they're withdrawing any of that investment.
Minister, please resume your seat. Senator Wong.
Thank you, Mr. President. Again, direct relevance. We accept, I think Senator Ryan said, if there's a glancing blow or something like that about other parties' policies, we accept that. He's been asked whether there's any limit. Is there an upper limit on how much he will spend? He's talking about us. It cannot possibly be directly
Senator
relevant
Wong.
with respect.
The minister was addressing the substance of the question. I will bring the minister back to the question again. However, Minister, you have order. Minister, you have 11 seconds.
Mr. President, as always, we will do what is necessary to protect the jobs, the security, the prosperity of Australians. We will make sure we invest where necessary for the benefits of Australians for their future.
Time has expired. Senator Gallagher, a second supplementary.
Thank you, Mr. President. Perhaps the Finance Minister can assist us with this, but is there any provision in the budget for this deal?
Minister.
Well, thanks, Mr. President. Mr. President, there are indeed many billions of dollars in the budget that we are investing already in emissions reduction activities, that we are investing already in supporting regional growth activities. I need only point you to the investments in our Agriculture 2030 agenda, to the investments in our modern manufacturing agenda, to the investments indeed in other aspects of our regional growth agenda, to the investments we're making in terms of meeting the stretch goals and targets in relation to emissions reductions, investments in terms of hydrogen hubs, 7 of them that we are committed to establishing right across the country, to investments that we are making in terms of driving new carbon storage opportunities, to the investments we're making in terms of Snowy 2.0, which, if I look just down the road, happens to be in a regional part of Australia. Regional investment delivering lower emissions environment that will support lower electricity prices in the future. That is indeed what we will continue to invest in and pursue.
Senator
lower
Birmingham,
emissions, more jobs,
the time
lower electricity
for the
prices.
answer has expired. We will now return to Senator Lambie. Hopefully we have a better connection. Senator Lambie, you have the call.
Thank you, Mr. President, and once again, congratulations. My question is to the Minister representing the Minister for Health, Senator Colbeck. When the Prime Minister shut down the country in March 2020, he promised Australians that we would use the time wisely and get ourselves ready before we had an outbreak. He told us we would make sure our hospital systems could cope with COVID before it got out into the community. It's been 18 months, but Premier Gutwein says Tasmania's hospitals still aren't ready. Since COVID arrived in Australia, to Tasmanian hospitals to make sure that they are safe so that we can reopen.
Your question did break up slightly, but I believe the minister probably got the majority of it. Minister, are you happy to proceed?
Thank you.
Order on my left. Minister, you have the call.
Thank you, Mr. President. And thanks, Senator Lambie, for the question. I did miss a piece which was a quote from the Premier, but Mr. Premier, I would like to assure all Australians that the work that we've been doing since the beginning of the COVID-19 pandemic has been to support Australians and to protect Australians as we work our way through the impacts of the pandemic. Mr. President, that includes for the health system, and one of the first things that we put in place was the private hospitals agreement, which allowed us to have access to the private hospital system, should we need it, to support the public health system to cope with the pandemic, Mr. President. And in the period of the pandemic so far, the Australian government has provided over $6.6 billion in funding for the direct costs of diagnosis and treating of COVID-19 and the broader public health costs for contact tracing, outbreak management and vaccination, Mr. President. We continue to support Australians with respect to the management of COVID and also maintaining their health. The National Partnership on COVID-19 response is in place until the 30th of June 2022. It was agreed by all jurisdictions, Mr. President, and the Commonwealth is covering 50% of the additional costs incurred by state and territory public health and hospital systems on responding to COVID-19 outbreaks. Mr. President, this funding, Mr. President, is demand-driven, and there is no cap on funding, Mr. President. In the context of reopening, Mr. President, all states have indicated they have adequate capacity to meet demand based on the Doherty modelling and supplemented by their own modelling. So when we get through the 70% and 80% fully vaccinated rates as the basis for reopening, based on the Doherty modelling, Mr. President, and those are the discussions that we're having with the states and the territories.
Just before we go back to Senator Lambie, I just would remind all senators, and interjections are always disorderly, but particularly when we have remote questions, it is courteous to the asker of the question that they be able to hear the answer. Senator Lambie, a supplementary question.
Thank you, Mr. President. Minister, could you please explain to other Australians why Tasmania won't open until it hits 90%? And can you clarify it's because your government has not put a cent into Tasmanian hospitals like it promised when COVID hit?
Minister.
Thank you, Mr. President. It's good of Senator Lambie to ask me the question and then answer it for me. But I would disagree with her question. I would disagree with her answer, Mr. President. Mr. President, the reason that Tasmania is not going to open until it reaches 90% vaccination rate is a matter for the Tasmanian government, Mr. President. It's purely a matter for the Tasmanian government. It is their decision, Mr. President. I would hope, Mr. President, that the Tasmanian government does what's happening in a number of other jurisdictions and follow the national plan, supported by the Doherty modelling, in support of Australians being able to move freely around the country and get back to contact with their families, Mr. President. That's what National Cabinet agreed. That was the process, and that was the rationale behind getting the Doherty modelling done in the first place. At what point in time could we safely reopen? At what level of vaccination rate could we start to safely reopen the Australian community?
Senator Colbeck, please resume your seat. Senator Lambie, a second supplementary question.
Thank you, Mr. President. Minister, has Tasmania received extra money for our public health system in the last 18 months because of COVID? It's as simple as that. Yes or no?
Minister.
Mr. President, as I said in response to Senator Lambie's first question, through the National Partnership in COVID Response, which is in place until the 30th of June 2022, which was agreed by all jurisdictions, the Commonwealth is covering 50% of any additional costs incurred by any state or territory public health and hospital system in responding to COVID-19 outbreaks. The funding is demand-driven and there is no cap on it, Mr. President. Through the partnership, the Australian government has provided over $6.6 billion to any state or territory where there has been additional costs for the direct costs of diagnosing and treating COVID-19 and for the broader public health costs for contact tracing, outbreak management and vaccination, Mr. President.
Senator Birmingham.
Thanks, Mr. President. I ask that further questions be placed on notice.
Okay. I'll just wait a moment while the chamber clears slightly. Oh, are you on your feet, Senator Wall?
Are there any? Take note of answers. Senator Keneally.
Thank you, Madam Deputy President. I rise to take note of the answer given by Senator Mackenzie to the question asked by Senator O'Neill.